Good morning. I'm Zac Hill. I'm the plant record specialist and taxonomist here at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. Thank you for coming out this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about our agave and mangave breeding today. So we've got, I think, 25 agaves blooming on property this year, which is pretty good. So we're going to go look at some of these and some of the processes we do to get hybrids.
Yeah, he did the golf cart.
Well, we'll start here because we've got some of our hybrids that are already in the ground and growing from some of our crosses we've made. So one of the first hybrids we made was crossing Agave pseudoferox, which is a northeastern Mexican already hybrid. It's sort of a Proto-Americana Gentrii cross, we think. So we took that and crossed it with Agave lophantha, which is a little narrow-leaved agave with a spike flower rather than the branched inflorescences. So we made that cross. It was Agave times lophantha. So we got those to bloom within 7 years of setting the seed. So we took that, we had ovatifolia bloom, which is the agave to my right here, which is another big agave. And we took pollen from it and put it onto the lophantha, which is like the one blooming behind us here, and applied it to the stigmas on there and made a little note on the tag, and then grew the seeds out. And at first the seedlings looked very much like the pod parent, like mom. They were a little bluer, but they looked very much like lophantha. So we didn't know really if we had hybrids yet or not. So Tony and I looked at them and we were like, well, I don't know, they're probably hybrids. So then we planted them out. We called it Agave amorifolia because since it's a triple hybrid, we needed to come up with a different name for it other than using the two parent species mashed together. And this is one of our hybrid seedlings from that. This is an amorifolia. A little bit later, we had ovatifolia and Proto-Americana bloom at the same time, and we crossed that. Oh no, this is actually lophantha. So this is like green goblet, the big bold agave we have bloomed, and we crossed it with ovatifolia and came up with Agave ovox. And we named this strain Large Ox because it's a big plant, two big plants crossed together. So with ovatifolia, we get the bluer color and a slightly wider leaf. So, and some of them sucker, some of them don't. It just depends on the seedling. Some of the amorifolias run and pop, and some, like this one, are more solitary. We've got a sibling of it over here on the end, which is blooming, which bloomed this year. You can see how much different this one looks compared to the wider foliaged one on the other side. But it's got the intermediate flower stalk, like that's in between the big paniculates and the narrow spiking forms. But we actually got this giant ladder out. We've got two volunteers that help us every year. They come and collect pollen and dry it out, and then Tony decides what we're going to put on the plants. And then they climb up the ladder and take all the anthers off the flower spikes and then put the new pollen on, and they put the little tags there to denote where we started the crosses and where we finished it. We had some pretty good success on this one. You know, the 15 or 20 pods will yield probably, they could yield up to 1,000 seeds. So I mean, that's a good set on these. So looks like we tried, we selfed it above the top line, and then we put, I cannot read we put Agave stryphantha, which is a cross of Agave striata with Agave lophantha onto this, so that we really screwed up the genes on these seedlings. They're going to be some really neat things. Sometimes we don't just do crosses between species. Sometimes we use two clones of the same plant cross. This is one of our former employees and one of our volunteers, Mike Pape, crossed two of his biggest Ovatifolias when they bloomed when he lived in New Hill. And we named this one Big Bertha because its leaves are like 16 to 18 inches wide. But this is just a straight species agave. Now, you would think this is going to be really old. This was planted in 2019 from a 2-quart pot. So with our water here in North Carolina, they grow tremendously fast. And we've had Ovatifolias flower in 8 to 10 years. So they're very fast when they're happy. So we've got a few other hybrids here in the parking lots that are really interesting. So this giant hybrid here, this is one we crossed Ovatifolia with Proto-Americana. This is, we called it Agave Protofolia brontosaurus because this plant was so massive, Tony wanted to name it after a dinosaur. Unfortunately, this one's only a year older than the Ovatifolia Big Bertha we just looked at. This was planted in 2018. So we got it to bloom in 7 years from a 2-quart pot. We've made crosses on this. It wasn't very successful, but we've got a few open pollinated ones on it, and a few hand selected crosses, enough to at least get us some interesting offspring in the future to see what, you know, Tony's always wanting to cross new things, and with new agaves we have bloom, we're ending up with other species and hybrids that we've never used in our crosses before to give us really big, bold. I know this is not looking so big now. It was beautiful last year. All these leaves are dying. Agaves are monocarpic. Their whole goal in life is to get big enough to then send up this giant spike, set a bunch of fruit, and then die. Some of them will offset. We do have offsets off of this one, so we will be able to offer this in the future. We're cross-cutting the plants to try to get this clone available. We now have a good idea of how big it will mature at, because obviously it matured and flowered. So years ago, Tony was talking with Hans Hansen, who is now at Walter's Gardens, about agave crossing with Manfreda. Some botanists lump Manfreda into agave. That's not really good in our opinion. You're lumping deciduous plants with evergreen plants that are very different. Yes, they hybridize. That doesn't necessarily make them separate genera. In fact, more recent studies have shown that you can actually break the genus Agave up into some smaller chunks, splitting out the striata groups, splitting out Bracteosa, and a few other things to make smaller monophyletic single genetic groups that are all descended from one ancestor rather than a giant approach to what an agave is. So Hans started breeding Mangaves after Tony suggested it, and now we're going to go look at some of Hans's really good crosses. He's taken multiple green plants and crossed them with spotted mangaves or manfredas to get intermediate plants with bigger spots, different foliage color, and some variegates. We'll go look at those. They're one of our bigger collections here in the garden. Some of them are hardy, some of them are not, but they're great house plants and great plants to bring in for the winter. So we've actually made some crosses here on site. Ours are more aimed at being hardy plants, and Hans has some that are hardy, but most of his use more tropical species. So one of the first ones we had from Hans was, so we had crossed an agave perii with, I believe it was a Manfreda halicensis. It's a Mexican running species, and we had some early crosses that were like this. We sent Hans plants of that. He used it and crossed it with some other species and gave us things like Aztec King, which are these two here, and then he was able to variegate this and turn it into all sorts of different things, because Hans has got the magic touch as far as plant breeding. He's an amazing plant breeder. So, and sometimes we get things, this is one, Queen for a Day. It's an edged, the spots all merged onto the edge and left the green in the center. Some of these are easily tissue cultured and some are not. So things like this Queen for a Day, they're ones that they're gonna take us a little longer to produce because we have to take the center and core it and pull offsets, and that takes quite a number of years to get mature plants and get quantities to sell. They don't tissue culture well because of how the layers and the cells on the leaves stack up. So it's like some of the hostas, they have multiple layers of variegation, and when you put it in the lab, somehow the plant decides that it wants to ignore what the edge was like and only wants to go to the green. So some are difficult. Hans has given us all of those that don't tissue culture well, and we've got a lot on Tony's property that we're still trialing out, and they're behind us in the greenhouse as well. There was one early hybrid, it was Agave Manfreda guttata, which turned out to be a hybrid. We used that in some crosses and gave us things like, this is Snow Leopard, and then we've got like Pineapple Express, and some of these, some have whiter edges, some have yellow edges, some have centers. They're all based on the same original guttata cross that we had. Hans put it all together, played the birds and the bees for all these mangaves, and came up with all these interesting ones. One of the hardy ones is Falling Waters is a good Agave ovatifolia cross. So not only did he end up with really ruffled edges, he was able to improve it and find edges. This is Niagara Falls. It's a good hardy one. We've got several of them planted in the garden. They form a nice big, like 2.5, 3 foot rosette. Yes?
Do the Mangaves and the Manfredas die off after they flower?
They do die off, but they are more likely to send off side pieces to bloom again. They are mostly monocarpic, so just like the agaves, but they form a bigger clump and they can bloom every year. The only agaves that don't really die after they flower are the striata group. We've got a clump of striata in the garden. We can generally rely on it to spike every year with at least 2 to 5 spikes, and it has bloomed every year for probably a decade. and each offset, it just continues to grow, and it'll send out a side here, side there. We've used it in some of our crosses as well, but Mangaves will go through a not so attractive period post bloom while they're waiting to try to come back with a new rosette. I mean, obviously we've got one blooming here. This is, who is this? Gilt Edge. So this is another one that probably didn't TC well, that we haven't released yet as far as I'm aware. But normally Manfredas have a single spike without any branching. Obviously this one is starting to take on the branched paniculate inflorescence here. Agave, ouch, a Mangave blood spot. This was one of the first ones that was released. It is a Manfreda crossed with Agave macroacantha. It's a small tropical agave that's got really big spines on the margins. This was I believe a spontaneous cross off of a seed pot from Agave macroacantha, but it's one of the many ones. They're just, Foxy Lady is a pink-edged sport off of Arctic Fox, I believe is the one. There are so many Mangaves, keeping track of which ones is a full-time job. So, any other questions?
What's that one doing?
What's this one doing? Okay, so sometimes when they flower, and agaves and Mangaves, not usually Manfredas, they sometimes will produce axillary plantlets. Sometimes if they don't set good seed, we've had ovadifolia form plantlets up on the spikes. But basically this just cloned itself. So you could actually pop these off. They've got adventitious roots formed, and you can have more of that plant. So it's basically tissue cultured itself and made a new clone, and you can just break them off and pot them up, and you've got a new plant. As long as it's not patented, you know, if you bought the plant, you're fine, as long as you're not trying to sell it. So, any other questions?
How often should they be repotted?
How often should they be repotted? We generally up pot every year or two, and depending on how big you want the plant to get, you can keep some of them fairly small if you keep them in a smaller pot. Tony likes to get them as big as we can, but you know, sometimes we go for years before we repot them. But a lot of these are mature size. This is as big as this one gets. This one gets a little bigger, but it's died back a little bit. This is Racing Stripes. This is actually one that's got Lophantha in it. It's been perfectly winter hardy for a number of years in the garden. So some are hardy, some are not. It's just an experiment based on parentage and things. Sometimes we've had some surprises. Yes?
Can any of these be winter hardy in the pots?
No. The problem with trying to winter them over in a pot outside is there's no insulation on these, and you generally lose about a zone's worth of hardiness in a pot for everything. So if you have things that are really cold hardy that you are pushing the limit for being warm, that's actually better for them to be in a pot outside above ground. But for things like this, you're going to kill it faster because the water in the soil will freeze into a solid brick and will damage cells, damage roots. Some of them that are hardy in the ground would still probably have trouble with being in a pot outside, unless you bring it in. Some of them would be good to probably about 20, and then you probably want to bring them into the house, unless they're truly tropical, and then we want to you know, pull them in the garage. You know, they're great to store in the garage, water them once or twice, even in the dark, they're pretty good. So They're pretty tough plants, but we put them all in the greenhouse.
Once
And
they're in the ground here through winter, do you cover them?
we do absolutely nothing to them in the ground. So everything here is, we try to pick hardy species, and we do test some for hardiness. We have some that are marginal. Some are hardy but don't like our moisture, so we try putting them under overhangs in like the crevice garden or where we've got big rocks. But we try to focus on agaves from the southwestern U.S., like New Mexico and West Texas and northeastern Mexico. They're wetter climates. I've been down and seen a lot of these agaves in the wild. My first trip was in 2005 to Tamaulipas, Mexico, and I got to see Proto-Americanas and Striatas, Lefantha, Montana Gentry, a bunch of species that grow like just, an hour or two south of the border into northeastern Mexico, where it's a comparable climate to us. They get lots of winter moisture, lots of summer moisture. A lot of agaves in the wild grow under some tree canopy. So like Agave Montana grows at 10,000 plus feet in the Sierra Madre Oriental at La Peña. It grows under pines and oaks in these rocky woodlands. It's absolutely stunning. So you think that they're sun plants, but some actually do occur in the wild in shadier locations. So, anything else? Thank you for coming today.